It's an in-depth look at the alt-rock explosion of the 90s. How did it all begin? What effect did it have on not just music, but pop culture? And how did it come to an end? All of that coming up next on Booked on Rock.
We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. I'm Eric Senich, back for another visit on the podcast is author Greg Prato, whose latest book is titled Alternative for the Masses, the 90s Alt-Rock Revolution and Oral History. Greg, I have decided to do an official count because I know last few visits you're asking.
Yes.
Do you have the most visits on the podcast? Okay. This is your 11th appearance on the podcast. You are now tied with the great Martin Popoff.
Ah.
Okay. So you have 11. He has 11. Who will get to 12 first? We shall see.
Well, at the end of this episode, I will announce what my next book project is. Maybe that will lead to a 12th appearance.
Okay. That's a teaser. And you just told me what it is. This is huge.
I did,
news.
but we're gonna save it till the end of this interview. You got to listen to this whole interview.
Yes,
right?
Huge news. So we'll get to that.
Okay.
So we're at the perfect age when this era of music that you cover in this book blew up.
Yep.
Okay, and you say it in the introduction. Most articles and documentaries, they make it seem as if Nirvana just came out of nowhere and grunge rock was overnight, but there was a long lead up to this. I mean, this goes back to as far as mid 80s, maybe even before that.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can go back to the late 60s if you want with like the Stooges. I mean, that was the seeds of punk rock, MC5 Stooges. But I mean, really, if you want to just kind of, most people point to the 80s, with Jane's Addiction, REM, those bands.
Is that the goal of this book, to tell the complete story?
The goal of the book for me is, I always have to make this clear. I love Nirvana. I love Kurt Cobain. But there were a lot of other bands, and in fact, bands that I loved as much as Nirvana and still love as much as Nirvana. It's not just Nirvana. It's become over the years, people, when you walk into Target, you're assaulted with Nirvana shirts being sold. You don't see so many Shudder to Think shirts being sold or Sebado shirts being sold. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Which, I mean, of course, Nirvana far outsold those other bands. But, I mean, I listened to Faith No More, Blind Melon, the Smashing Pumpkins' first two albums, Primus's early albums. There's so many bands I listen to as much as Nirvana and love as much as Nirvana. So I kind of just wanted to shine the spotlight on maybe some other bands that either people don't know about or maybe that people forgot about and may be able to rediscover through this book.
Let's talk about the early alt-rock scene. These bands were literally the alternative to what commercial radio and MTV were playing. Chapter 1, titled Setting the Stage. Alt-rock was like a tea kettle simmering throughout the 80s slowly, and then boom, it hits. And there are some great quotes in this chapter. Corey Glover of Living Colour, one of my all-time favorite bands, talks about Soundgarden opening for Living Colour. This is very early on, and he was blown away by this. Talk about that early scene.
So the late 80s. At that point, I'm just talking about from my personal experience. I'm listening to primarily heavy metal. Then I know with me, my friends, and a lot of people probably, we are kind of becoming sick and tired of just like what MTV is playing. It's very predictable. The production of the late 80s is just, I can't even listen to it. I mean, just to give an example, sadly, the great Ace Frehley recently passed away, and I was listening to some of his 80s solo albums, and his first album is good. The production sonically is good. But then I heard a song off his 1989 album, which is called Trouble Walkin'. It was actually the title track. And to me, it was like unlistenable, not because of the song, but just the production is so harsh and so 80s with that cannon drum, and it just so, and it's sad.
Built for stadiums and arenas. It had that big sound to it.
But see,
which is what Pearl Jam was kind of pissed off about with 10.
Yes.
It was produced like a Def Leppard album, and that's not what they wanted. And then they ended up remixing it years later.
Yes. But it's funny is we just I just mentioned that specific song by Ace Frehley sounding the way it sounded, and it's like harsh and just. But meanwhile, it's funny. He came from the band Kiss in the '70s. Their early to mid albums are some of my favorite sounding albums because they sound so live, and especially the first actual live album is the most. A bit. Of course, what's funny is I'm going to say it sounds very live, but we all know that it was heavily, heavily overdubbed, so it's not really alive, but
But
just
still,
the sound. Yeah.
yeah, it's funny you
But
say that. I was just blasting Alive on my way home today before this interview.
but to get back to your original question, so in the late '80s, it just there were some great bands. Of course, we had Jane's Addiction, but for people like me that were just kind of getting out of heavy metal or looking to maybe broaden our like horizons, there were certain bands that are definitely the bridge between heavy metal to then what becomes alternative or is alternative that then becomes huge in the early '90s. Bands like Faith No More, Jane's Addiction, Living Color, Soundgarden, and then of course later we have also Smashing Pumpkins. So those bands really I think connect the dots for a lot of people that were maybe into hard rock, heavy metal, but wanted to listen to alternative rock or just wanted something a little bit different that wasn't just heavy metal. I think that was like those bands I think we can thank for kind of setting the stage a bit.
And they were all playing in clubs,
Hmm.
not big venues, kind of pockets around the country. We know Seattle, of course, but these bands were all out there. They're playing. They're under the radar, but they're out there for a while.
There's one thing personally, a personal experience in the late '80s. Well, no, throughout the '80s, I started regularly going to concerts in 1986. That was when I was old enough to start going. And from '86 through the rest of the '80s, all I saw were arena shows because that's all I thought there really was, and that was all that me and my friends went to. The first club show I ever saw would have been in early 1990, I think March of 1990. There was a club called L'Amour in Brooklyn, New York, and I saw a bill that was Voivod headlining, Soundgarden in the middle, Faith No More opening.
Oh, wow.
And that was a life-changing show just because at that point I really connected with Faith No More, but seeing them live and being so close, it was totally unlike, I mean, to love a band and to be that close and to just be blown away, it's totally different than me sitting in the way back last row of Nassau Coliseum trying to squint to see what Steven Tyler is doing. It's just a totally different ball game, totally different vibe, different energy. Guys jumping in the audience. I mean, you're not going to see Paul Stanley jump in the audience.
Let's go back to Jane's Addiction. They are so important. And I was fortunate enough to have a college roommate who was into Jane's Addiction early on. Huge fan, played their stuff all the time. And I came around to them and then eventually became a huge fan. As you write in the book, the importance of Jane's Addiction's 1990 to 1991 infiltration of the mainstream cannot be overstated. Matt Pinfield, you talked to for the book, longtime DJ, former MTV VJ, told you this band should be credited as the most important. Talk about Jane's Addiction and why they're so important.
Well, like I said, Jane's Addiction really appealed to so many different people. And they were huge without really having a big mega hit single. Like they never had like a Smells Like Teen Spirit. The song Been Caught Stealing was, popular, but it wasn't like a top 10 single. The song called Mountain Song was also huge amongst just rock fans. And it seems like over the years, the song Jane Says has become almost like a stairway to heaven for like alternative rock people. But when it first came out, it was somewhat popular, but it wasn't what it's become now, which is like an all-time classic song. So the thing that I think really makes Jane's Addiction so important is, of course, Lollapalooza. That's what really I think proved to people that yes, there's something going on, there's something on the horizon. You don't have to be stuck listening to. I mean, I hate to name bands, but like Winger. You don't have to. Which honestly, Winger gets a very bad rap because they are great musicians. Kip Winger is a very. I don't know if you know this. He actually writes like symphonies and stuff now.
Yeah. He was nominated for a Grammy.
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, I shouldn't even badmouth Winger because they're actually very talented. I'm talking more about like at that point, it's like the fourth and fifth wave of like bad, like hair metal, where it's just nothing original.
Yeah.
Which is funny. If we skip now to about 1995, then we have the fourth or fifth waves of like Nirvana and Pearl Jam, right?
Yeah, it came back around, same
Yeah, so
thing.
it's funny how it's just a circle that it's always the same, no matter what. A band will come out that changes everything. Say Guns N' Roses drops, then you don't get bands that do their own unique version of Guns N' Roses. You get bands that are just mimicking Guns N' Roses, and the record labels love that because that's easy just to put out a band that sounds just like, Guns N' Roses, and hopefully they're going to score a hit. That type. So that has always gone on in music. That will always go on in music. Back to the Beatles, back to everybody.
I'm curious what you think of Kennedy's quote in the book. Kennedy was a longtime MTV VJ. She
Yes.
told you that if Jane's Addiction didn't break up in 1991, they would have been right behind Nirvana in terms of massive popularity. What do you think about that? If they stayed together in the 90s, what would they have become?
I think it's possible, but then again, I don't know how Middle America. I mean, one thing to Perry Farrell's credit, he was really pushing things. I mean, now the whole transgender thing and everything is, I think much more welcomed and much more like accepted. It's definitely much more discussed. Late 80s, early 90s, there was still a lot of like homophobia and things like that. If you just look at some of the comedians of the time, some of like the song lyrics, whether it be hip hop or, certain metal bands. Um, so I don't know how much Jane's Addiction would have been able to go over in, some state that's maybe not that progressive. But I mean, who knows? It could have happened. We don't know. I mean, of course, David Bowie was huge, right, in the 70s, and that was even further back in the quote unquote dark ages of progressive thinking and things like that.
Yeah.
So we never know. I mean, personally, I love Jane's Addiction. That's also a band that I listened to especially for that period in the early '90s that I loved as much as Nirvana.
Nothing shocking is the best. It's perfect. There's nothing.
And they also break up just at their peak, which I personally think was a mistake. They should have just kept going, but they broke up when they broke up.
Let's talk about Nirvana, specifically Nevermind. That's unquestionably the moment that knocked the door down, let all the alt rock / grunge rock bands in. Matt Pinfield, going back to him again, he told you that nobody could have predicted how big Nevermind would be.
No.
And he says if they said that, they'd be lying to you. What did you think of Nirvana when you first heard Smells Like Teen Spirit?
Well, I just want to say Matt Pinfield is 100% right. At that point in 91, I was pretty well aware of what was going on with like the underground and stuff like that. And the only thing I ever heard, the only way I ever even saw any mention of Nirvana, there were a few photos a year before of Chris Cornell wearing a Nirvana shirt. That's the only thing I ever knew about Nirvana before. It was a very weird thing. Before Nevermind came out, there was definitely a buzz. Like I would be reading Rip magazine, or I remember even reading, I think it was like Billboard magazine, and people were praising this album. They're like, "Oh, this album is what, like, I forget what the quote was, but like, this is what teenagers listen to in the back of their cars," or like it was like some really intense descriptions, meaning that this is a very important album that's really going to shake things up and also change things. And yeah, I mean, similar to, Guns N' Roses a few years back, and then also Metallica. It was just a buzz, Metallica around Master of Puppets. It was like a undeniable buzz. Guns N' Roses with Appetite for Destruction. You couldn't deny that there was a buzz, and you couldn't predict it. There was no way to predict that these bands. And it's funny too how all these albums come out within like a few. Master of Puppets is in '86, Appetite in '87, the Black Album in '91, and then we have Nevermind in also '91. So these huge, mega selling albums all come out kind of at the same, in like the same era almost.
You talked to Butch Vig, who produced the album. He said the album changed his life, but he didn't like talking about it for a while. Why was that? And then what changed his mind? He started talking about it again. He talked to you about that.
I believe he said when he went back and worked on like a 20 or 25th year anniversary or 10 or I forget what the year was, but some anniversary edition. But I mean, everyone's different. I mean, some people, I guess, get, don't want to talk. I guess maybe also because of the way that Kurt Cobain died and everything, maybe it left like bad, like, memories or something.
And Butch Vig produced a lot of albums by other bands, so I'm sure that was part of it too.
In fact, I'll tell you what, my favorite Butch Vig productions are not Nirvana. It's actually the first two Smashing Pumpkins albums.
Yeah, I love Siamese Dream.
Siamese Dream, I think, is by far Butch Vig's best production.
Yep.
That's just my personal observation.
I just did an episode on My Bloody Valentine, which I knew little to nothing about and didn't realize how influential they were and didn't
I love
realize,
that band.
yeah, how brilliant Kevin Shields was and is. And Smashing Pumpkins, Billy Corgan, heavily influenced by the sound, the guitar sound, the production, and you can hear it in Siamese Dream.
What's funny is I got turned on to that band. I remember would have been in 92 I got turned on to them, and it was through, or maybe 93, 93. I was reading an interview with Vernon Reid of the band Living Color, who I was a huge fan of and I'm still a big fan of. And he was talking about albums he was listening to, and he mentioned the Loveless album by by Loveless by My Bloody Valentine. And I remember back in the days, if there were some CDs you had that you did not like, you can go to the record store and trade them in and get store credit. So I grabbed some CDs I was not listening to anymore, and I traded in for My Bloody Valentine. And at first, it did not really register. I thought it was okay, but it didn't really. I don't know. There was something about it. I guess it was because it was so different sounding than what I was listening to.
Yeah,
But over the
absolutely.
years, I've become a massive fan of that. That's one of my favorite albums of all time, especially of the 90s.
I can't stop listening to Loveless. Every single song on that, it's addictive. I was telling the author about that. I said, thank you for introducing me to this band. Sidebars in this book that are great. One's titled Madonna Goes Grunge. The band Candlebox, signed by Madonna's label Maverick. They got to hang out with her after a show.
Yes. I believe it was I think Kevin Martin says that it was after a Rush show at Madison Square Garden, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. Yes, and I think Madonna's big quote, or her suggestion to Kevin is, "Oh, you really got to read to like get yourself to be like a better lyricist." And I got to say, I'm not the biggest Madonna fan, but her lyrics, I don't think are really her strong. I mean, has anyone really ever said, "Oh, I love Madonna's lyrics"? They're
Right.
really,
Exactly.
yeah.
What a moment though. That must have been. You devote a chapter to how the 90s alt rock movement had a big effect on not just the music of the time, but fashion, politics, and even the way audiences behaved in concert. What did the people you spoke with have to say about how much the bands influenced politics? Because that was huge. MTV was was a huge influence on young people voting in the early 90s, the 92 election.
Yeah, in 1992, MTV had a thing called Rock the Vote, and it was a series of commercials where you had people like Chris Cornell, I remember, just suggesting that people go vote. I remember going to Lollapalooza in 1992, and Al Jorgensen from the band Ministry at the end of the show brought his daughter out on stage, and she was very young, and he said, I forget the exact quote, but it was like, for the children of tomorrow, we all have to vote or something like that. And I remember even Dave Mustaine of the band Megadeth, although they're not alternative rock. He did a whole thing in the summer where he was, I think, at the Democratic convention, and he was the MTV correspondent, and he was like interviewing people like politicians and stuff. So MTV was really integral in a part of the whole process of the upcoming election, which was Bill Clinton and also the first George Bush. And yeah, people point to that for swaying the election in Clinton's way because I remember like Bush came off looking very old and like not hip, and Bill Clinton came off as like a younger, more hipper with it type candidate. So he wound up winning, and a lot of people point to MTV's influence for that. I've definitely read that over the years.
Then he played saxophone on Arsenio Hall, right? Now,
He
the
did.
other thing was stage diving.
Oh, yes.
That was the other thing.
Crowd surfing. I have to say,
Crowd surfing, yeah.
I never crowd surfed, and I hated crowd surfing because I remember
Wait, what's the
specifically.
difference between stage diving and crowd surfing? Isn't that
I
the
will
same?
say, yes, stage diving is you have to go on the stage and you jump out in the audience.
That's
Now, that
right.
at least, yeah. So that at least you see someone coming at you, so you could put up your hand. Crowd surfing I hated because I remember actually a few specific shows. I remember seeing Faith No More at Roseland, Living Color at Roseland, and seeing Blind Melon a few times in smaller venues. And you're watching the audience, so you can't see obviously what's behind you. And someone with their nice big Doc Marten shoe is coming behind you and hits you or kicks you as hard as they can in the back of your head. So you have no way of. I remember there was at the Faith No More show, I tried getting as close as I could, and I lasted for maybe one or two songs. I found myself at one point just watching it with my hands like this because I was just bracing
Yeah.
myself. I was like, you know what, forget about this. So I just went in the back. So yeah, at that point, at that point it was getting too popular. Even it was different than seeing Faith No More at Lemoore, where it's 1,000 or 2,000 people. Then we go to Roseland, which is like a few thousand people. So
When did mosh pits get big? Wasn't that around the same time?
yeah, that was. I'm trying to think when I would have the first show ever. So well, I mean, moshing really, you could say like thrash metal really brought that to the metal audience with Slayer and things like that. I know like Slayer shows would have mosh pits back, and also of course, Anthrax had the song called "Caught in a Mosh." So you could credit thrash metal for really bringing moshing into rock music. It wasn't really alternative. Alternative music of the '90s, of course, co-opted that. And I remember going to like Fishbone shows, and there was insane moshing and things like that.
Fishbone. Yeah. My roommate loved Fishbone too.
I have never moshed in my life. I've never crowd surfed. I have never stage dove. I just stood in the back and watched and tried to just enjoy the music.
And that's why you're here today.
Right, right.
Otherwise, you may not be standing here today.
Quickly, I'll just tell you, I saw a show once. It would have been the fall of '91, just as Nevermind was hitting. I was going to Stony Brook University, and there was a double bill that played the Gymnasium of Stony Brook. It was Fishbone headlining with Primus below them, and it was insane just how vicious the moshing and crowd surfing was. There were people who were coming out. There was one poor girl came out on a stretcher. I don't know how injured she was, but I mean, it was just totally insane. I just could never understand what the attraction was of that.
Greg Prato back on the podcast. His latest book is titled Alternative for the Masses, the 90s Alt Rock Revolution and Oral History. A quote from Lou Barlow from Dinosaur Jr. in the book on the band covering Peter Frampton's Show Me the Way. And it wasn't a sarcastic take on it. Talk about how the 70s influenced a lot of these alt rock bands of the 90s.
Yes. The thing I loved so much about the '70s is the production. That's my favorite productions. All the band, it seems like all the albums that I love the most from the '70s. I just love the production. I love the production of Physical Graffiti, never mind the Bollocks. Uh, Kiss, Rock and Roll Over, I think is a great production. And what's great about those albums I just mentioned, it sounds like just a band on a stage with just everything is mic'd and you just let it rip and just record it. And that's totally what you get with a lot of the '90s productions, or even it started in the late '80s with we mentioned Dinosaur Jr. Then as we go on Sonic Youth and bands like that, it's more of a real production. It's not like that horrible late '80s where that horrible drum gated sound that it's like a
Yep.
cannon going off that it's just so dated and bad sounding. I mean, as much as I love Living Color, I go back and listening to Vivid, and even Vivid sometimes has that bad drum thing, which is a shame because Will Calhoun, the drummer in Living Color, is absolutely phenomenal.
Absolutely. And that album, Vivid, from start to finish, so that's a perfect album.
Yeah, you know what's funny is they put out an album that tends to get overlooked in 1993 called Stain, and that's my favorite Living Color album. It's a very dark sounding album, and I love when bands get dark. Like I love, of course, Van Halen Fair Warning we talked about in the past.
Stained has Type on it, right?
Yes. No.
No.
Type is on their second album, which is called Time's Up.
Okay, Time's Up. That's right.
Yes, Stain has the big hit on that was called Leave It Alone.
Oh yes, great song.
Yeah, and then they had a song on it that should have been a hit, but unfortunately the video, like what I talk about in the book, it wasn't even me that says it's other people. What's funny with alternative rock, it was definitely kind of a scaling back with like the shows were in clubs and things like that. The production was more raw. But one thing that didn't change was the production for music videos. It was still these hundreds of thousands of dollars with these stupid directors thinking, I mean, not all of them, but like certain directors thinking that they're making mini movies. So anyway, so to get back to Living Color, for the song Nothingness, like the video just wasn't appealing. It wasn't that good. So the single just never did anything and never took off. It may have been a hit in like other countries, but it should have been a massive hit here, and it just never took off. And I say it could be due in part to the video not being very good.
Yeah, because that's another great song, and
Great
I do
song.
remember Rock Radio playing the single on there.
Yes. Yep. Should have been a hit, and the album Stain should have been massive too. I love that album. To this day, I love that album.
Very experimental band. I saw them at Toad's Place in New Haven, and they were doing some crazy shit, man. Where there were some people that are expecting, like, when are we going to hear all the popular stuff? And they would go into these long instrumental jams, like fusion and stuff like that, which I appreciated. I loved it, and they're still together. I mean, they're still.
I saw them 2 years ago on a bill. They went on first, and then the band Extreme was headlining. I'll share a secret with you and everyone listening to this.
Okay.
Living Color blew away Extreme.
Ooh.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna put it out there. I was so it was they were so phenomenal. They looked great, sounded great. The set list was great. I highly recommend people go see Living Color. They're as good now as they were back when I saw them in the early '90s.
Their bassist Doug Wimbish lives right near me here in Hartford, Connecticut.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Corey Glover is one of the most underrated singers ever. He, to this day, and I've even told him, I said, you're singing now better than like you ever have. He real. I put him up there, like I talk about in the book. There's a whole chapter about singers, and part of the reason why I wanted to do that chapter is I wanted to, of course, I love Chris Cornell, but it seems like everyone is like, oh yeah, the '90s alternative rock singers. Yeah, oh yeah, Chris Cornell was the best. He absolutely was the best, but so is Jeff Buckley, so is Bjork, so is Shannon Hoon, so is Corey Glover, so is Lane Staley. The list goes on and on.
Yep. Agreed. Handful of producers who played a big role in some of the decade's standout albums, one being Steve Albini. You were one of the last people to interview him before he passed away. He produced In Utero from Nirvana. Who are some of the other big producers and what made them stand out? The 90s sound. We were just talking about the 80s sound. What made those guys stand out, and they captured the raw sound, the raw energy of these bands.
Right. Well, one gentleman that I interviewed for the book who's very underrated producer is Paul Q. Calderi. He produced Holes, Live Through This, but then he produced great albums by the band called Morphine, who's one of my favorite. I absolutely love that band. They never really get the credit that they deserve. He also produced the first Radiohead album. He actually, I think, co-produced it. The album called Pablo Honey that has the song Creep on it that everyone knows.
Sure.
That he pointed out has over 1 billion streams on Spotify, which probably is equal to what, like about five or like $10 in probably royalties at this point.
Right. Yeah. But he's an underrated producer because you don't hear that name a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. You don't really hear that much about him. So yeah, I was able to get him for this book. Butch Vig, of course, is a fantastic producer, but I'm always going to say Siamese Dream is his top production. I mean, of course, Nevermind is great, but Siamese Dream is just a fantastic production.
We talked about My Bloody Valentine. They are part of the shoegaze genre, and you do get into some of the other subgenres from the 90s. Alt country is one interesting genre. What are some of the other ones that?
It's funny. It seems like with alternative rock, you had all these different subgenres. You start having bands like Rage Against the Machine that starts merging rap with stuff. But as I talk about in the book, there was a band that predated them called Urban Dance Squad that tends to also get overlooked. And they were really the first band to truly merge rap and also rock music. And I'll be honest, it's going to be a very possibly controversial comment.
Okay.
I prefer Urban Dance Squad over Rage Against the Machine, especially Urban Dance Squad's first album, which is called Mental Floss for the Globe.
Wow.
I highly recommend, if you like Rage Against the Machine, check out that album. That album is fantastic, and I personally prefer it more over Rage. I mean, of course, I respect Rage Against the Machine, very, very original band. Tom Morello, of course, phenomenal guitarist, highly, highly original, but I prefer Urban Dance Squad.
Urban Dance Squad. I got to be honest with you. I don't think I've ever listened to an Urban Dance Squad song.
They had a hit song in 1990-91 called Deeper Shade of Soul.
Oh, I must have heard that one.
Yeah, I saw them open up for Living Color in 1991, in early 91.
Was there a video for it?
Yes, there was. It's a video of like people skateboarding in a pool.
Okay. Wow. How about that?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure once you hear it, you'll say, oh yeah, now I remember that. It was played pretty heavily for like a month or so on good old MTV.
Wow. So what are some of the other subgenres from the 90s that?
Well, I mean, really the top, I mean, you already said shoegaze. That to me is definitely high up there. One thing, just to veer off for a second, One thing that was great about doing this book too is I went back and listened to albums or even heard some albums that I maybe didn't or wasn't that familiar with. Like I went back and heard them. And there was an album that I loved in 1994 by the band Lush called Split. And I had not heard that in decades. And I went back and listened to it and I fell in love with it again. It's one of my favorite 90s albums. I love that album. And that band is one of the leading shoegaze type bands. Of course, My Bloody Valentine is probably the top shoegaze band.
Yeah.
The name shoegaze was given to that genre as kind of an insult. It was from a British journalist, or it was someone, or a British manager. I freak. Oh no, excuse me. It was a British record label person that said, "Oh, these bands, all they do is they're strumming their guitars and just looking down at their shoes. They don't even care about the audience." That which I guess that was a reaction, I guess, to what was going on at the time with all the like big arena rock type things. So.
Yeah, shoegaze or dream pop is the other.
Dream pop, yeah. And then of course we also have Britpop we can't forget, right? Which is of course Oasis and Blur and those bands, which I'll tell you I never really connected with. I don't know if it's because I'm here in the States, but I mean probably not because there's plenty of other British bands I love. So I don't know. Britpop, Oasis. I was into the Verve for a while. That was a band I was into for a while, but yeah, Oasis went right over my head for some reason. I don't know why.
What would be an example of an alt country band?
Wilco is usually
Okay.
pointed to. Uncle Tupelo, I think, is another band that's listed. Again, it's funny. That's one.
What makes it alt country?
Well, I mean, I guess it had country. It had like a country twang, but maybe it maybe fit. Well, listen. If you go back and listen to some of Nirvana Unplugged, it's not country, but it's definitely folk, right?
Right.
Mark, the great Mark Lanigan, late great Mark Lanigan, some of his solo stuff had a little bit of a country thing to it. He put out a great album in '94 called, I think it's called Whiskey and the Holy Ghost, which really I should know since I did a bloody book about Mark Lanigan. But
Great book.
that's the bad thing about putting out so many books. You tend to forget song titles and things that go in certain books. So
it's one of your 11 appearances. People can find it.
Yeah, but certain alternative bands had country leanings in it. So maybe listening to Wilco after you hear Nirvana Unplugged, there wasn't that much of a stretch. Maybe that's the thing that connects the dots a little bit, you could say.
How about female rockers in the 90s? A lot of female rockers. Suzanne Vega, Alanis Morissette, just off the top of my head, Cranberries.
Yes. Lush.
Lush. Yeah. What was cool about the female rockers that came out during that period too was they weren't just pretty faces and you just throw a guitar, strap a guitar around their shoulder and let's just do the best we can. These were badass musicians.
Yeah, well, I mean, the one thing too that looking back in the late '80s, when you looked at rock music, for by and large, especially when it came to like metal, it was almost exclusively just men, white men. Then you get to the '90s alternative rock, and it's men, women, different races. It's like which to me was a throwback to the late '60s, early '70s when you had bands like Santana, Sly and the Family Stone, which was great. So that's what also made it very unique.
Liz Phair was another one from the 90s.
There were some fantastic female excuse me. There were some fantastic female alternative artists. Like Bjork was phenomenal. You had also PJ Harvey, who was fantastic. She was great. Lush, again, I love Lush. That's one of my favorites from especially the '90s. There were two singers. I think there was the lead singer in My Bloody Valentine was a woman. There were actually two females in that band. So, and then, and again, by going back to the book and me getting reconnected with some bands I hadn't heard in a long time, a band called Helium, which is a very underrated band.
Helium.
That's a great band as well. And yeah, that's a female fronted band. A band called also Royal Trucks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Influenced by the Velvet Underground, you could say. They're also a very cool, unique band from the time.
There's a story in the book. Royal Trucks blew an entire advance on drugs. Jennifer Harama's the vocalist.
Yep.
And what did she tell you about that? That's a true story?
Yeah, well, there was
most of it.
Yeah, I was going to say one thing that I did with this book is there were a few stories over the years that were never really confirmed. So yeah, I asked her about that. That was a famous story in the alt rock underground that Royal Trucks blew a whole album advance on drugs, and it's partly true and it is true, but it wasn't like a huge $1 million advance. It was not a lot of money, but still, I mean, it was a quote unquote album advance. I guess it is true. But then there was also one of the cool interviews I did for this book was Ian MacKaye from the band Fugazi, and he also set the record straight. There was a famous story over the years that people always talked about that supposedly he and Fugazi turned down $1 million album deal offer from Ahmet Ertegun, and he talked about that, and that wasn't necessarily true. But one thing he did talk about, which I never knew, there was another label that came along, DreamWorks, that offered him also the Kings to the Kingdom, and he said no because they had their own label and they were totally their label is called Discord Records, and they were able to call the shots and be in control of everything. And they were like, "Nah, we just want to do our thing. We don't need you guys." So
Now, this story about Goo Goo Dolls' name, I've never heard this before. I don't know if it's been out there, but there is a story behind it. The song is about somebody. Johnny Resnick wrote it about somebody, an MTV VJ.
yes, it is about Alan Hunter.
Johnny Resnick had a crush on. Wow, who knew? No, do you
No,
want to tell the story, or are you going to?
Yes, no, I'll say it. It's actually Kennedy.
Yes.
The VJ Kennedy, who now is best known for her political TV hosting stuff.
Right.
What's funny is my parents watch political stuff. I personally I'm not into politics at all, but they're like, oh yeah, we know her, we like her. She's on the TV doing interviews, blah blah blah. I'm like, yeah, back in the '90s, she was all about like alternative music. And she's like, oh, I didn't know that. So
Now she figured it out. He didn't say anything, but she figured it out and then ran into him
yes,
or talked to him on the phone. No, she ran into him and said, "That's about me, isn't it?"
yes, exactly, yeah. And then
Because he was married, wasn't he?
yes, he was. He was married, but he felt a deep attraction to her, and they hung out. And but she, didn't want to, I guess, become his girlfriend because she knew that he was actually married. So it just wound up ending. But then he wound up and wrote that song, and yeah, she heard the song. I think she heard it as like a advanced cassette, and she heard the lyrics, and she put two and two together, and she confronted him. And about 10 years ago, she put out her own book, and she talked a little bit in that. But yeah, I when I spoke to her for this book, I wanted her to retell the story, and I think she even expanded a little bit on it, maybe included a few things she didn't talk about previously.
There's a particular line in the song, like the line "Maybe for a while." There was a specific line that really had her.
I'll be honest, I was never a big fan of that song, so I can't really, the lyrics I can't tell. I mean, I could recount the lyrics to the song Galaxy from the band Blind Melon, but not so much the song Name by the band Goo Goo
There
Dolls,
you go. Same here.
Right?
Galaxy's a great song.
Yes.
Chapter 19, titled Second Waivers. At one point, we start to see these bands popping up and they're jumping on the bandwagon. You mentioned it by the mid 90s, right? Is that when it starts to really start to happen? And who are some of the bands who took the most heat for this?
Yeah, about 94, 95 is when we start getting some very obvious bands that are just kind of like not really. See, the thing that I love so much about the early 90s bands is they were all doing something unique. Nine Inch Nails did not sound like Smashing Pumpkins. Smashing Pumpkins didn't sound like Blind Melon. Blind Melon didn't sound like Primus. On and on and on. At a certain point, you start getting bands that are shamelessly ripping off Nirvana, shamelessly ripping off Pearl Jam, where you have these bands where the music sounds like Nirvana, but the vocalist sounds like Lane Staley, vice versa. Like stuff is weird stuff going on. I mean, the band that comes to mind automatically is the band Bush that got a lot of heat. But music is so awful at this time that when I hear a Bush song now, I'm like, yeah, it's actually not that bad. A Bush song from 1994, 1995 is a pleasure to hear than most of the mainstream rock music that that I hear on commercials and stuff nowadays.
It's so true.
Yeah, and then also you have to give Gavin Rossdale credit. He wrote all those songs himself, unlike now where you have all these schlemiels hiring like 50 professional songwriters to write one stupid song.
I always loved Stone Temple Pilots, but They were kind of lumped in with that, right? They were
They
considered
were,
a Pearl
yeah,
Jam
but
ripoff. And
I will give Stone Temple Pilots credit. Their first album I was never really a big fan of, which is called Core. It's very, very derivative. But to their credit, from the second album on, they totally ditched the whole, like, for instance, Scott Weiland was a great singer, but on the first album, he's, I think, too much Eddie Vederish. But from the second album on, he's not sounding anything at all like Vedder.
they became their own band from that point
Yes,
on.
exactly. Yes. So Stone Temple Pilots, I don't. At the time, they definitely caught a lot of heat, but I wouldn't even put them in like the rip-off type bands. Which then, of course, leads to the late '90s, early 2000s, which the nadir of it is Nickelback and also bands like that.
Creed.
God, Jesus,
With
yes,
arms wide open.
horrible. Yeah, just
Yeah,
which I
that's
mean, yeah, I'll admit, I once did interview the singer from Creed, and he was a very like nice chap on the phone, but
Scott Stapp. Yeah.
yeah, but just not a fan of their music, not a fan of yeah, just didn't do it for me.
Hey guys, we'll get back to the show, but first I want to tell you about an exclusive deal for Booked on Rock listeners. Get 15% off any purchase at oldglory.com. Over 300,000 officially licensed items covering music, sports, entertainment, and pop culture. Merchandise featuring legendary music artists like Bob Marley, The Beatles, Grateful Dead, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, and many, many more. Go to oldglory.com. Make sure to use the promo code BookedOnRock. Also find a link in this episode's show notes, or just go to bookedonrock.com and click on My Deals. I love the stories in the book. Like we mentioned, the name by Goo Goo Dolls, the story behind that. There was a song from the movie Jerry Maguire that inspired an Everclear classic. Everclear, one of my favorite bands to come out of that period too, by the way. What was the song?
Now it's a Bruce Springsteen song. It's something Garden. Is it? Do you know what it's called? I don't even
Yes,
know what it's
Secret
called.
Garden.
Secret Garden. There we go. Okay, yeah, yeah. Art Alexakis tells a really good story that he had a bit of writer's block, and he was trying desperately. He kept trying to come up with a follow-up album to their big hit album, and he kept submitting it to the record label. And there was one guy he kept working with. I think it was the A&R guy, and he keeps saying like, "It's not there. It's not there yet. It's not there yet. Trust me. You're gonna put. If we put it out now, it'll do okay, but it's not going to do what you want it to do." So then Art hit a very bad thing, a writer's block, and just started really doubting himself. And he was in New York City by himself, walking the streets, just very, very depressed. And he went to see the movie called Jerry Maguire, and there was that Springsteen song in it. And something about that song inspired him. And then he went back and he talked about, I forgot what song he wrote or songs, but it inspired him. And finally, he wrote songs that he submitted, and the A&R guy was like, "Good, yes, now we finally have an album worthy of a follow up and everything." So
They had a big run.
they
definitely
did,
had a big
they
run.
did, and also again, give him credit. I'm pretty sure he wrote all those songs himself, or at least most of those songs himself. So
Yeah.
you know.
The death of Kurt Cobain, April of 1994, did that moment alter the course of alt rock? Was it the beginning of the end, or was it already on the decline and going too commercial at that point?
Well, it's impossible to say. We don't know what would have happened if Kurt lived. I mean, there's some great quotes in the book. I think one person that hits the nail on the head is Craig Wedren, the singer from the band Shudder to Think. He says, when you have people like Kurt Cobain or Jim Morrison or Jimi Hendrix or Janis Joplin, when these people die at a young age, I mean, now I'm just adding my own thing. I'm like putting words in his mouth, but he made a comment or a point similar to this, that when these people die at a young age, they die at their peak. They're the most attractive. They've put out nothing but good music, and then they're just, that's the image we always have of them in our head. There's no chance of them putting out their Van Halen 3, perhaps, or there's no chance of them putting out their music from the Elder or their Hot Space or their, Lulu. There's no,
Or just aging in
or
front of us. And
aging or falling off the stage or, getting plastic surgery that doesn't go well, like all these things that happen to people as they get older and they get crucified for, in the press. So when Kurt Cobain died when he did, Nirvana was still hugely popular. But what's funny too, that tends to get forgotten, and I remember this as a fact, and Bill Gould from Faith No More confirmed this in the book. Nirvana was kind of looked at as not on the decline, but they definitely had peaked at that point. So if Kurt Cobain didn't die when he did, there's always a chance that Nirvana, who know, maybe their next album wouldn't have, maybe they could have possibly declined, but you'd like to think not because they did have a pretty huge, following still, and they were lined up. They were going to be on Lollapalooza that summer, so they were still very much in demand. But I mean, just to put things in perspective, I know Pearl Jam at that point was much bigger. Like they put out Verses, and that I think set the record for like most copies sold, and it was selling millions and millions of albums
in the first week.
Exactly. So, but over time, Nirvana, of course, has gone on to be probably the hugest rock band of the '90s. So.
You look what happened with Pearl Jam in the second half of the '90s, though. Their popularity faded,
exactly.
Which I think
I mean, who's to say?
The mainstream audience grows tired of a certain genre and they move on to the next thing. Whereas fans like us will stick with a band, but not everybody does.
And then something else you never know. I mean, I'm a huge Smashing Pumpkins fan of just their first two albums. If you told me after Siamese Dream and how much I loved them at that point, that, from their next album on, it's going to sound like a different band. You're not going to like it. I just never liked which to me, Melancholy is the hugest album they've ever put out, but it just never, ever did it for me. It just sounded.
I am with you. Yeah. I agree.
The singing, I don't like his singing on that. The production, I don't like. It sounds like a double album that should have just been a single album. It sounded like it was all, it just lacked the special magic of Siamese Dream. And even Gish, I think, is better than that.
I'm so with you on that, Greg. Yeah, that I remember there were songs that I could pick and choose and really like. 1979, I would say, is probably my favorite.
I would say if Melancholy was a single album and if you had also Butch Vig producing, I think that album would have been 1,000 times better.
Yeah, that was
but
96.
Then again, that album has sold zillions of copies. So.
Yeah, that was like 95, 96. Yeah, it did.
95, yeah. But then, but like what my point is, so who's to say that Nirvana's next album wouldn't have sucked, because I would have never guessed, because how much I love Smashing Pumpkins in 1994, that a year later I just would not like their next album. But the thing for me personally, yes, Kurt Cobain's death did definitely affect me. But the rock death of the 90s that affected me the most by far is definitely Shannon Hoon.
We've talked about it many times.
Blind Melon really connected with me more than most of the other bands, more so than even Nirvana. We all have our bands that we connect with, just on a personal level and also musical level. And Blind Melon and also Shannon Hoon was that band for me. And I was really expecting big things for them. And it to this day, I hate when musicians die young, or just, of course, when just about anyone dies young. But Shannon Hoon, to me, I really wanted to see, I would have loved to have seen what they would have done on the next few albums, because that Soup album is probably my favorite album of all the 90s alt rock albums.
You know how much of a fan I am. And you wrote 2 books?
Yes. Yeah, the first one is called A Devil on One Shoulder, and the second one is just merely called Shannon.
And you've gotten pretty close to the guys in the band because of it.
Yeah, actually, Christopher Thorne just texted me yesterday. I sent him a copy of the book, and I interviewed Roger Stevens for this book, and Christopher thanked me for there's a picture of them in that, and there's mentions of Shannon and also Blind Melon music throughout. So that was pretty cool.
Well, I guess it answers my question. This is the last question: is what do you think? And there are a lot of underrated or forgotten bands that you shed light on in this book, which is great. If you had to pick one, who's the most underrated band of the 90s? Is it Blind Melon?
Yes and no, because underrated, I mean, that first album sold millions and millions of copies. So, Blind Melon is better known than, say, Morphine, or they're better known than Grantley Buffalo, or they're better known than the band Slint. But all those bands I just mentioned are all fantastic.
So if you had to pick one, the most underrated that really didn't get much attention and should have.
Let's think about that for a second.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy for me to say Blind Melon, but the band that I love that I still listen to this album to this day, and it's so original, and it's definitely not for the masses. I understand why it was not a huge album and the band was not huge, but still, it should have on like and it should have in a perfect world, is the band Shudder to Think.
Yeah,
And they
tell me
put
about these guys. I've never heard anything from them.
they put out an album called Pony Express Record. And I remember I bought it in late 1994 because I was such a big Smashing Pumpkins fanatic at that point. I would read interviews or concert reviews and stuff. And Shudder to Think was affiliated with Smashing Pumpkins. They played shows together. I think they opened for Smashing Pumpkins. So it was at the point that like I'd walk in Tower Records and I'd see their CD. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember them through Smashing Pumpkins. Maybe I'll check this out. So I remember buying it. And it's one of those albums that you hear it once or twice. You're like, I don't know about this. But similar to Blind Melon Soup, the more you hear it, the more you get attached to it, and then you realize how fantastic it is and how totally original it is and how timeless it is. Matt Pinfield once had a great description of them that they sound like sheer heart attack era Queen.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
it's very difficult to. It was art rock. It was that sheer heart attack era Queen. They came out of Discord Records, which is Fugazi. So it's also post-hardcore. It's all these different genres that they were doing. And the singer is a fantastic singer. He can sing up way high. He can do all these different styles of music. Similar almost. I mean, they don't sound like Faith No More, but maybe similar to Faith No More, Angel Dust, and also the album King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime. That it's an album that has a bunch of different styles on it. That's what makes them so unique.
Midlife Crisis. Love that
Yes.
song. So that's cool though. I got a few bands that I want to give a listen to now. Suggestions from you. One band we didn't talk about at all, which is one of my favorite bands to come out of the 90s, Collective Soul.
That's a band. I actually interviewed the singer for Song Facts,
Ed Roland.
and I was debating like, should I put in because the thing something that I kind of enjoyed with this book that I made it a point to do. The last two chapters are the stories behind some of the classic alt rock albums of the 90s and also stories behind some of the classic alt rock songs. And it's from either the actual it's from an actual band member or a video director or someone that's somehow affiliated with that album or that song or that band. And in some instances, like I may have already had an interview done for like Song Facts, the website, but I'd say about 90% of this book is all original new interviews. But for some of them, I was able to reuse quotes like that. And I interviewed the singer from Collective Soul, and I was on the fence. I was like, should I put him talking about Shine in the book? And just due to space constraints, I had to axe that. So
Okay. Yeah, that to me, one of the most underrated bands, although they were huge in the 90s, but I still love them. And I would put Dosage among the best albums of the decade.
are you familiar with the album Mighty Joe Moon by Grant Lee Buffalo?
No.
That's a great album you should check out. Okay? And then we also talked about Urban Dance Squad, Mental Floss for the Globe.
Yep.
Then also Sebado's Bake Sale is a fantastic album as well.
Sebado's Bake Sale. Okay.
Yeah, Sebado is Lou Barlow. He's also in the band Dinosaur Jr. He's in both bands.
Okay.
Sebado is his kind of solo project that he sings and plays. He plays guitar and Sebado plays bass in Dinosaur Jr.
Find the Booked on Rock website at bookedonrock.com. There you can find all the back episodes of the show, the latest episode in video and audio, links to all of the platforms where you can listen to the podcast, plus all the social media platforms. We're on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X. Also, check out the Booked on Rock blog, find your local independent bookstore, find out all the latest hot rock book releases, and before you go, check out the Booked on Rock online store. Pick up some Booked on Rock merch. It's all at bookedonrock.com. Alternative for the Masses, the 90s alt rock revolution and oral history. Out now, goodbye wherever books are sold, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Look for it at your nearest bookstore. Look for it at your nearest independent bookstore. If you want to find your nearest independent bookstore, go to bookedonrock.com. Where can people find you online, Greg, before we make this announcement about the next book?
Yes. Go to x.com/Greg Prato Writer. That's always a good place. I'm always posting my latest interviews and articles and I was going to say book ideas, but no, I keep those hush hush. But book release dates and things like that. So I say that's probably the best way. And of course, just go to Amazon and go to the book section, do a search for Greg Prato, and you'll be assaulted by a huge amount of books that you could choose from, which I think is perfect for the holiday season. Don't you, Eric?
Absolutely. And if you're a sports fan,
Yes.
you've got some books on New York sports. You got the Jets.
Oof.
You have the book on the Islanders,
The Mets, the Yankees.
the Mets, the Yanks.
Yes.
And
Man, I'll tell you, it's brutal being a fan
oh
of
and
the
7.
Jets nowadays.
Oh,
I'm done.
and then I ended up getting Aaron Rodgers, which I was teasing you about. Now I've got it.
I was going to say, and you get the Aaron Rodgers. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the poor Jets. The question is, will they go 0-17? Do you think?
I hope they do, because I want them to totally clean house, get rid of their head coach, get rid of everything. I want Woody Johnson to even sell the team, but I don't think that's ever going to happen anytime soon, because he's making too much money. But no, they have to clean house. They have to just start from scratch. That whole organization is just a complete embarrassment.
You heard it here, folks. Greg Prato, fan of the Jets, wants them to go 0-17.
Yes,
There
because that's the only way that's going to, I think, create a big change. I think.
Yeah.
I think.
By the way, this new book is from our friends at Motorbooks.
Yes, indeed it is. Yeah, I want to give a shout out to them too. They did an absolutely phenomenal job with formatting it. The photos are fantastic. Excellent job to those gentlemen. I give you all a round of applause.
Absolutely. Steve Roth and the guys at Motorbooks.
Yes, superb. Thank you, guys. I
Preaching to
appreciate
the
it.
choir on that one. Yeah. So let's talk about the big news.
Yes, the big news.
What's the next book?
Okay. Me, like a lot of people, were very upset by the great Ace Frehley's passing. And after he passed, I realized, I interviewed Ace a lot of times over the last 15 years or so. So I went back and looked at the interviews, and I realized, I have all these interviews where he talks about pretty much all phase of his career. Because, like, although he'd be promoting a solo album, I would always ask him questions about Kiss and about even his personal life and his hobbies and things like that. And he was always a great interview. He was always very honest and very, very friendly, a great guy. So I thought, what if as a tribute to Ace, I put together a book that compiles all the interviews I did, and also do interviews with some people, some very well-known rock people that were fans of Ace, and them talking about what made him so great and also influential. Because I think you'd probably agree with me, Eric, along with probably Eddie Van Halen, Ace Frehley has to be 2 or 3 right behind as far as how many people he was a huge influence on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How many? I mean, so influential. How many guitarists picked up a guitar because they watched Ace Frehley or listened to him or saw him on that Alive album cover?
Right. So the next book, which I'm going to be rush releasing, I'm going to put this out through my own company, Greg Prato Writer, is called, I'm reading it so I don't get the title wrong, Talk to Me, Conversations with Ace Frehley by Greg Prato.
Oh, man. That's so cool, Greg. Yeah, that's just, I love Ace. I love Ace, love Kiss. And I think that's great that you're doing that, because it's going to give us the story in his words. And that's interesting, because I did a tribute episode just this week. I put it out. And how many times did I hear brutally honest, told it like it is, but also friendly guy, very nice guy. There's a picture of you and Ace.
It's a picture of me and Ace when I did an interview with him back in 2009. I don't know if you could see that.
Yeah, that's when Anomaly came out in 2009, right?
Yes. Yep. Yes.
Which I love that album. That's probably his most personal, deeply personal album. Very
he was kind enough to sign this to me. It says, "To Greg, rock on, Ace Frehley." That was nice to him that he signed that for me.
Ace, man, one of a kind. I'm still reeling, I'm just listening to nothing but Ace solo and Kiss.
Yeah, it's definitely hit me the same way when, of course, Eddie Van Halen passed away, Neil Peart. It's sad that we're just at the age now that these guys are getting old, and they're just sadly part of life.
What's different from Eddie with Ace was, as a journalist, I'm sure you'll agree. I mean, Ace was a guy who could give great interviews and didn't mind doing interviews. Eddie was a little shy. He didn't want to do that kind of thing. And I think for Ace, that helped him a lot, kept him in the spotlight. He always enjoyed talking about it. And again, told it like it is.
He did.
So people keep an eye out for that, and just do what I do. I would go to Amazon and I signed up. I clicked on the, what is it? The follow Greg Prato link.
Yes, do
on
that.
Amazon. So
Do that.
there you go. All right, Greg. Thanks, man. We'll look forward to it. We'll have you back on for that Ace book, I hope.
Great. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, cool. We'll share some stories from inside that one. Greg, thanks, man.
Thanks, Eric.
That's it. It's in the books.